Fred Claire, thank you so much for taking the time to connect today. To say I'm honored to be having this conversation would be a gross understatement. It's so awesome to see you. So excited to hear from you. How are you doing these days?
I'm doing well, Matt. Thank you for asking. Feel very blessed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the goals here will be to do our best to properly capture a life so rich, so enriching for others. And that's a daunting, if not impossible, task when speaking with you. But I think it would be a disservice not to give it our best effort. So, thinking about starting from the beginning, maybe going loosely in chronological order, but there could be some twists and turns along the way. I think it would be great if you could describe your upbringing, where you grew up, the family dynamic, and how that kind of laid the foundation for who you've grown into and who you are today.
Well, I grew up in a very small town in Ohio, southwestern Ohio, Jamestown, Ohio. And from the very beginning of my life, I fell in love with sports in playing the games and primarily basketball and baseball. Jamestown was a very small town, very small school. I think there were only 32, 33 students in our class, so we weren't big enough to have football.
Hmm.
But it was being in Ohio, it was a basketball town in terms of sports. And so that was my um, beginning and early memories. And more important than that, uh, being so blessed to have wonderful parents. My father owned the corner drugstore in Jamestown. My mother had been born and raised in Jamestown. Her graduating class numbered 11. So you can see, although it expanded from 11 to 33, it wasn't really a fast growing community. But uh, blessed with wonderful parents and a wonderful brother and sister, sadly no longer with me, with us. So my family moved to California in 1950, and a rather major move for a family from a little town in Ohio. But my love for sports continued. My interest in journalism began because I wanted to try to figure out a way of how I stay connected with sports. And I thought it would be, as a coach, I certainly realized early on that my talent wasn't going to carry me that far. So I continued my education first at the junior college level that I'm very grateful for. First at El Camino and then Mount San Antonio, and then graduating from San Jose State in 1957 and starting what would be really my full-time professional career when I took a job with the Whittier Daily News.
Yeah, and I love a story about the way that came together because, as I understand it, you got your journalism degree from San Jose State, graduating on a Sunday, essentially getting your first job with the Whittier Daily News the next day. Is that correct? Just no taking it easy, getting right to work. Is that the way it unfolded? And if so,
Well,
what was behind that urgency and
there's
how?
only one day missing there. As I recall, the graduation was on a Saturday. I had appointments arranged with newspapers in Southern California where my parents lived. And so on Monday, my first stop was at the Pomona paper, where the managing editor said that they might have an opening on City Side, but it would probably be 2 weeks. And I told the managing editor, wonderful man by the name of Ted Johnson, that if he'd keep my name, I would appreciate it, but I really couldn't wait 2 weeks. I then drove to Fullerton, where the secretary told me the managing editor had me on his schedule, but he had a 2 hour meeting come up. And so it would be 2 hours. And I said, ma'am, I really can't wait 2 hours. And so I drove to Whittier, and Mel Rich, the managing editor, uh, hired me that day, and I began the next morning.
Wow. Yeah. And what do you attribute to the urgency of landing a job so quickly? I know now it's common to take, whether it's a gap year or just a bit of time off to relax and unwind a little bit. You just got right to it. And how has that mindset really continued to shape your life since that moment?
Well, Matt, I tell that story not to say of look how aggressive I was or I got a job in 2 days. That's not really the point that I want to make with that story. But the point that I do want to make and continually make in being involved with students and young people, we don't have a day or days to waste. And I was blessed to have a friendship with Coach Wooden. And he said so many great things. Um, but one of the things that stays with me, Coach Wooden said, was make each day your masterpiece. And so I
Yes.
think we need to make the best of each day. And I really don't know when I look back and I tell that story, I wonder, God, it was kind of strange. Was I really that aggressive in finding a job? But I was. I needed a job. I needed to support myself, and so I was going to make it happen. It didn't seem out of the ordinary. It just seemed like reflection of my mindset.
Well, yeah, that's a really good way to put it. And looking ahead to what came next, is, as I understand, you worked there for a year, then had a 6 month stint in the Army Reserve. And after that, the Whittier Daily News managing editor offered to bring you back with a better job than you had before, and that would be the role of sports editor. And you ended up turning that down because the current sports editor was a friend named Willie Mears. He had a wife and a child, and this story has a really special place in my heart, because for all the listeners out there, Willie was my grandfather, and he's my inspiration for pursuing journalism, where I was fortunate to get a degree from the University of Southern California. And the two of you actually met in 1957, 63 years ago. For context, the Dodgers were still in Brooklyn at the time. And if you hadn't made that decision, I know we wouldn't be having this conversation. His wife, at the time, my grandma Liz, still alive and well. His child was my Uncle David. And you probably didn't have a way to know at the time, there was another child on the way. That's my mom, Stephanie. So myself, my family, I think we're forever grateful for the thoughtfulness and kindness that you put into that delicate situation. I think that shows so much strength and integrity on your part. And I'm wondering what factored into that choice for you, and how do you think your approach to that decision has perhaps continued to shape the way you make decisions and the way your life has unfolded since then?
Well, it's so remarkable, Matt, and speaks so much to everything we do in life and every decision we make and the impact that it can have on other lives. Sometimes not having any idea what that impact might be. But in this case, I had written as you noted, I was in the Army Reserves. The Whittier paper has a major fire and literally burns to the ground or nearly to the ground. And I wrote to Mel Rich, and again, as you recounted, Mel Rich, the managing editor, he said, Fred, I said, well, I have a job when I get back. He said, Fred, you'll not only have a job, but we're going to name you the sports editor. But Willie was the sports editor. And it's not as if Willie wanted to make a career out of being a sports editor, because as you know, in your family, Willie was an entertainer. I mean, his goal in life,
Mm-hmm.
as I knew Willie, was to be on stage. But this was a job that he had to support his wife and support his family. And here I was, a young guy with no obligations other than to myself. I didn't have to support anyone else. And it just didn't feel like the right thing to do. And I think in life, and having now lived for 85 years, most of us on this earth, I think, know right from wrong. Hopefully we do. And how much better we would all be when we make decisions, careers or otherwise, to do the right thing. And as it turns out, that was very much the right thing. And as I recall, I came back to Whittier, and then the opening in Pomona, where I first applied, opened up, and I became went to work for the Pomona paper, later became the sports editor of the Pomona newspaper, which really led me into an opportunity to then go to work for the Long Beach paper, which led me into covering baseball, which led me into a career in baseball.
Yeah, that's remarkable, and we'll dig into plenty of this. I do want to skip ahead quite a few years to note the highlight of my college experience at USC was in the spring of 2009. I was taking a sports business and media class taught by Jeff Fellenzer. I believe you taught that same class from 1999 to 2001. And you came to speak to my class. And afterward, I was able to give you a handwritten note from my grandpa Willie, and you two were able to get back in touch over the final year of his life. And that to me just reemphasizes the decision not to essentially take his job back in the 1950s. More than 5 decades later, that had a generational impact on my family. It was able to ultimately get you back in touch with Willie through the end of his life. And I'm asking this not necessarily from a self-serving way to get you to talk about my grandpa and a family tie, but more to speak to the power of having character and nurturing long-term enduring relationships. But what was it like to know somebody like Willie and other friends you've had over the course of, we're talking 6 decades. That's just remarkable.
Well, I think it's so important in terms of friendships and relationships. And I guess part of that was my own upbringing. My mother, born in this small town in Jamestown, when she was in her 80s, she would write letters and get letters from people that she knew from this little town in Ohio. And now here I am in my mid 80s, 85, and I still correspond via email and an occasional call with a fellow by the name of Rick Foley, who is probably one of our best athletes in our little school, actually went on to play professionally in the Cincinnati Reds organization. I think that our friendships, our relationships speak as much about who we are as who we are. And I think you don't see that said or written much, but I think it's very defining. We tend to find people that we enjoy being with. And I think that those relationships are so important in life. And sometimes in higher profile cases, it is very much on display. Carl Erskine, the great Dodger pitcher, celebrated his 94th birthday last week.
Wow.
Carl is the last, he's a friend, a dear friend. He is the last of the boys of summer. Carl still speaks, and because it was more of a public forum, he was there with Jackie, with Pee Wee, with Nuke, with Duke Snyder. He was a key part of the Boys of Summer. And he treasures the center part of his life in addition to his family. And when I think about friendships that I've been so fortunate to have, I treasure them. And you can't just dismiss them. You can't forget them because they're so valuable.
Yeah, very well put. And I know that beyond relationships from Jamestown and with my grandpa Willie at the Whittier Daily News, there's so much beyond that, I'm looking to transition into your career between the Whittier Daily News and the Dodgers. I know the Long Beach Press Telegram kind of bridged that gap into the Dodgers organization. What was it like going from covering the team to working for the team? And how would you describe that stage of your career?
Well, it was it was a change because having um, been a journalism major, been in the newspaper business with Whittier, with Pomona, and with Long Beach, that now I was going to make this transition. A number of people have done it, many people have done it, from the creative part of writing, of covering the team, because I love that creativity as a sports editor, whether it was uh, producing the sports pages, working with the printers to do that, whether it was writing a column, whether it was covering a game. And so that was a transition when I had the opportunity to join the Dodgers in 1969. And then I did go from covering the team and covering the team. I had a really good inside look at what the Dodgers were about as an organization. And I was so impressed with the O'Malley family, with the leadership of Al Campanis and Red Patterson and Bill Schweppe, kind of legendary figures in Dodger baseball history. So that transition, uh, in many ways, was a rather easy step for me because I felt that I could use as my training in writing and my whatever creativity that I could bring to it to help in the promotion of the Dodgers and to service as publicity director, my first position, to service the writers because I understood the position. And the organization was so small that that it gave me a true inside look, not only in the front office, but in friendships with Walter Alston and all of his coaches and all of our great scouts and all of our great player development people, managers, coaches at the minor league level. So now here I found myself in the dream of my youth. How do I stay connected with baseball? I'm really connected. I'm squarely in the center of it in my own little way.
Yeah, and that became a pretty big way. And we can get into the tenure as GM, but before that, you were with the Dodgers for a while in a different role. And I would love to have you describe that role a little bit. And also, one of the cool things I learned when reading Extra Innings, you were the person who coined the phrase Dodger Blue. And that's so iconic now. How did that come together? And how does that play into everything you did with the Dodgers before becoming the general manager?
Well, my chain of advancement, if you would, with the Dodgers is that I started as publicity director. I had the chance to become vice president of public relations and promotions when Red Patterson left to become the president of the Angels. Then I had the opportunity to become executive vice president, overseeing all business operations. And then in 1970, the opportunity to become executive vice president and general manager. The Dodger Blue came about because in publicity and promotions, I mean, that's our job. How do we market this team? What do we do to make the best presentation that we can with the team to excite and serve the fans? And it's always good when you're looking for something, look in other areas, other businesses or similar businesses, and say, what's happening here that I can learn from, that we can learn from. And I had never been from Ohio. I was an Ohio State football fan as a kid, but I certainly wasn't a Michigan fan necessarily. But as I read more about Michigan the thought of Big Blue, it really struck me of a major college, and there are others, but this is what struck me, of being identified with a color. And what really excited me is what if we could bring that collegiate spirit to the Dodgers, a professional team. That's what we're trying to create. And so I came up with the concept or the words um, Dodger Blue. And I knew we had it made after we had the right guy to help paint the town once we created the theme. And that was Tommy, the sort of. But I knew we had it made when Union Oil produced a bumper sticker after 2 years of implementing and then growing Dodger Blue. Union Oil came out with a bumper sticker, showed no baseball. It didn't say Dodgers. It said, think blue. And everybody in Los Angeles knew what that meant. So if you think that's not satisfying, to be a part, and the emphasis is to be a part, because none of this happens on an individual basis, and all of it happens on a team basis.
Yeah, I love that comparison you drew to Michigan football, even growing up in Ohio, because I myself grew up in Southern California. I'm an Angels fan, and I knew exactly where you were going with the think blue. So I love that point about not just being in, in your own lane with laser vision. There's a lot to be said for being focused and all that, but also being aware of what else is going on and picking things here or there that you can maybe incorporate into what you're doing. So clearly you did that very successfully with the Dodgers for a while. And then ultimately there was a fateful moment in the spring of 1987. At the time, Dodgers general manager Al Campanis made some insensitive remarks on Nightline and was fired as a result. And the choice of you as his successor seemed to catch a lot of people off guard at the time. You were admired for your character and your work ethic, but there was also the angle of a marketing exec and a former sports writer with no experience making trades or constructing a roster. So at the time, while a lot of people were surprised, were you surprised by how it all unfolded?
I wasn't really surprised because in 1987, when Al Campanis went on Nightline and made some rather really truly unfortunate remarks uh, about minorities having opportunities in baseball related to the anniversary of Jackie Robinson. I think it was the 40th anniversary in 1987, indeed it was. Um, but again, our front office was very small. And so I had attended, Al became a very good friend. He was always kind to me. In spring training, I would be in all of his meetings with the coaches, the manager and the coaches. And so when Al was asked to resign, um, Peter O'Malley was actually in Houston, the place where the Dodgers had started the season, the city where they had started their season, and where Al had appeared actually on the floor of the Astrodome after opening game of the '87 season and went on Nightline. That before the third and final game in Houston to end the first homestand, Peter called me, and I'll never forget his words or his voice or how he sounded. He said, "Fred, you have to take this job." We were, as an organization, we were in trouble. We were in trouble really in many ways, as the Dodgers have never been in trouble. We had a firestorm. The team of Jackie Robinson, sadly, unfortunately, the general manager, executive, or the vice president general manager of the Dodgers, had made insensitive comments that couldn't be tolerated. And so Peter called me and said, "Fred, you need to take this job." I met with him the next day, And I said, Peter, I'm happy to serve in any way that I can to help the Dodgers. But I said one thing that's very important to me is that I want to be assured that I have full, total, complete responsibility. Because it's a very visible job. Most people don't last that long. And if I was going to be run out of town, I wanted to be sure that it was for the reasons that I made, because I knew that I was surrounded by good people. And I knew enough about our people and the game that I could do this job. And so I took this job with all of the will and might and power and passion that I could bring together. The best part of that, and I'll get back to an earlier point, the press went to Peter and said, Peter, how long does Fred have this job? Peter gave the best possible answer. He said, he has it for today. And you know, Matt, that's all any of us really have. And that's the way that I approached it, going back to what drove me to make 3 stops before getting a job on my second day after college. I had it for today. And I knew one thing. I was going to do it as well as I can and work as hard as I could. And whatever that time period was going to be, they were going to get my best.
Yeah, and I think that's a really powerful point, and it transitions into something I wanted to ask. A recurring theme on props and hops, even when we're talking, totally different topic in a sense, NFL betting, navigating uncertainty, especially in a year like this. There's so much uncertainty. Betting on any outcome in normal circumstances has plenty of inherent uncertainty, and there seemed to be major uncertainty within the organization after a losing season in 1987, and I know that owner Peter O'Malley was exploring a more experienced general manager moving forward, but you wanted to continue in the role. And at the same time, that decision was in somebody else's hands. So, how did you handle that period of uncertainty?
Well, I knew I had found a role that I truly, it seemed like this was career wise, this is why I was here. I had this meaningful position. And as time would show, some decisions in 1987 proved to be very good decisions. So I did quickly make moves and had good relationships with the other general managers, almost all of them, in fact, all of them that I knew. But I think in a period of uncertainty as we are today, or in any business, there are a couple of very key factors. One of them is you have to gather all of the available information that you can collect. And you have to identify and be able to identify, because there's a lot of information in every field, to say the least. You have to be able to identify what is the most important information, whether it's by individuals or reports or whatever. And then the other thing, and this became true when I took the job with the Dodgers in uncertainty, you have, as a leader, you have to take responsibility, because no one can know where we're going as an organization unless someone is there saying, this is where we're going. These are our guiding principles. This is how we're going to get there. And I am the responsible party. And if it doesn't work, you need to come to me, because that's my charge. And I think that applies to everything we do, uh, everything in life. That and even when the press came to me, I said tritely, "The buck stops here." I didn't say that to say, "Look how much power I have." I had that because the fans, the players, The other teams needed to know who is now responsible for Dodger baseball. I'm your guy. And if it doesn't go well after a year and I'm gone, so be it. I accept that. I can accept that. That's why I wanted responsibility, accepted responsibility, and had the confidence to know that I was surrounded by some of the great people in the game. And that gave me great confidence because I knew who I could count on.
Yeah, I love that notion of taking responsibility, especially in uncertain circumstances. It's maybe easier to do so when the variables are easier to identify or when everything's going well. But it's especially powerful in those types of moments. And that reminds me of another recurring theme of the Props and Hops podcast. Everything is a bet. It goes far beyond sports betting. In everyday life, maybe continuing to do the same thing sounds safe, but that in itself is betting against the alternatives. Or making a change might not only mean ruling out the status quo, but also any other possible changes. So we're always dealing with some form of a bet with varying degrees of stakes. And Peter O'Malley ended up making a big bet to keep you and Tommy Lasorda with the Dodgers after a disappointing season in '87. He detailed his thought process very eloquently in Extra Innings. And I would love to hear what it was like for you to win the World Series the very next season and see his big bet on you so handsomely rewarded.
Well, I can remember vividly that a terrible season in '87. We finished 16 games under 500. Many changes going into '88. And I can remember as we got into postseason play with the Mets that had really killed us during the regular season, and then with the powerful Oakland team, a thought that drove me was, we're going to win this thing. And when we do, I'm going to have an opportunity to thank the people responsible. I'm going to have the opportunity to thank our players, to thank our scouting system, thank our minor league system, thank, of course, Tommy and our coaches and our major league players. And we're going to be back on top of the baseball world after having gone through such a devastating and difficult period. And that's really what drove me, was knowing. And I think that, and I've seen the tape there with Bob Costas in the post game after we won the World Series. And the words I had thought about, and it's always good to think about your words, were the words that I used when Bob asked me my reaction. Was a credit to so many people who had contributed so much.
Yeah. It was, a lot of people doing a lot of heavy lifting to make this happen. And I'd like to dig in a little bit more to that '88 season. Shocking the baseball world to make that happen. Such a quick turnaround. Most noteworthy move, signing Kirk Gibson. He ended up being the National League MVP in 1988, hit one of the most famous home runs in baseball history. He was a big piece, but certainly not the only piece. What was your approach to signing him and building out the rest of that roster? And what do you think the biggest factors were in succeeding so quickly?
I think that we had an important foundation, even though we had been really terrible in not only 2017, 2016. Those were 2 seasons of being 16 games under 500. I don't think that anybody was picking us to do anything in 1988. But the one thing that I really tried to do was to bring people that I was well aware of, people of character, people who played the game with just a all-out total effort. The first player I signed on day one or day two as general manager was Mickey Hatcher. I known Mickey from a previous stint with the Dodgers. I knew about Kirk through the scouting reports that we had, both professionally through Mel Didier and Kirk's amateur career through Dale McReynolds. I had a very clear picture, even though he'd gone on now and was established major league star. John Shelby, one of the first players I traded for, I knew the character of this player. And these were guys who were truly character people. I think they got underrated by some. They said, John Shelby's spent half his time in the minor leagues. But when I sent a scout to see him, that spring of 1987, he's in Rochester, New York, and it's freezing cold, and he's the first guy on the field in practice and the last to leave. I knew this was my kind of player. So I say that the most underrated part of the scouting report is character. Tell me about this guy. We know he's good enough, whether he's playing in the NFL or the NBA. He wouldn't be there if he wasn't the talent. You can't get there without talent. Okay, you got the talent. Now tell me about the person. That's what I want to hear. I can see the talent. Tell me about the person. Character counts.
Yeah, absolutely. Another John Wooden saying to live by. So, yeah. So, 88 just was a magical ride. It was so surprising to so many, but it was such a big moment, obviously, for the Dodgers organization. And I think we'd also be remiss not to touch on the some of the highs being accompanied by some lows over the course of your decade plus with the Dodgers. There was the infamous trade in 1994, giving up Pedro Martinez for Delino DeShields. And I see you starting to grin a little bit. We all know Pedro went on to become a Hall of Famer on the short list of greatest pitchers ever. DeShields had 3 uneven years with the Dodgers, but not to harp on the result, more taking into the fact that at times we all make decisions that don't lead to the desired outcomes, and certain things might look so obvious in hindsight. That's life. So I'm more interested in the process behind that decision at the time, as you recall it, and how you're able to process, looking back on that result and just living with how it netted out.
Good questions and good topic, because Pedro is a wonderful man. When you talk about character, Pedro, uh, uh, just like his brother Ramon and a third brother, Jesus, were character people as well as professional players. And when I look back on Pedro, uh, I tried, we had a need for a second baseman. And I tried every way possible to fill that need, and including a offer to our current, our second baseman year for Jody Reed, which is really an off the charts offer that he didn't, unfortunately for everyone involved, didn't accept. But when I look back and think about that, is that I really, I didn't underestimate Pedro, which was it maybe sounds strange in saying that, but in striving to do one thing to fill this need, I paid way too big of a price. And so, as and there are a lot of people, it's interesting, a lot of people who kind of want to not take me off the hook, but kind of give a reason why Fred did this. And Dr. Job, the late great Dr. Job, a dear friend, had talked in meetings about Pedro, a rather small person, about injury risk in so many words. So I can remember Frank calling me when Pedro's career was taking off. Said, Fred, you never mentioned to the press about reports that I gave. I said, Frank, you didn't make that trade. I said, and again, Matt, this comes with accepting responsibility. I said, your job is to give the best reports you can from a physical standpoint. And you're the best, in my view, you're the best in the world at what you do as an orthopedic in baseball. So it had nothing to do with you. What you said, you didn't make the trade. So I think the summary of it, Matt, the most important part, it still gets back whether it's success or whether it's failure, to take the responsibility, to learn from every move you make, good and bad. And bad teaches us far more than good in most cases in our life. And to don't make excuses, and to move on in life, and let go. And when I congratulated Pedro when he entered the Hall of Fame, I should have saved the text. I didn't. But Pedro and I always had a good relationship, and he texted back and said, Fred, it was an honor to play for your teams with the Dodgers. So again, Matt, you have to learn. You have to learn, and it is I don't fault anyone. I made the trade as I made all trades. I asked a lot of questions to a lot of people and people I trusted. And the best philosophy I think a general manager can have is that when there's a good move, give credit to others. When there's a bad move, take responsibility. That way, you're not casting any blame and you're keeping a path to continue to get information because you don't want to shut it off. If the person feels, gosh, I gave Fred bad information, now he's blasted me, and now I feel foolish. So I put it down as for what it is. There were a lot of trades. They're all there to be judged, and they should all be judged.
Yeah, and I'm sensing a big recurring theme here, being able to take responsibility for better or worse, and the clarity that that can bring to a situation. And I think there are some direct ties to what ended up being a pretty messy exit from the organization in 1998. You had held the role of GM for more than a decade, and that March of 1998, Major League Baseball approved the sale of the Dodgers from Peter O'Malley to Fox. And then in May of 98, the new ownership trades Dodger superstar Mike Piazza without your knowledge. And among many red flags, one of the key players getting back in return, Gary Sheffield, had a no trade clause. Any GM would have known that. And your initial instinct was to resign on the spot. I believe your words were, you don't need a GM if trades are being made without his involvement. And yet you did stay on to help sort that out for a little while. What were your thoughts as this was unfolding, and how close were you to resigning on the spot when they informed you of the trade? And then ultimately, what led you to stay on for a little bit longer?
Well, anyone who knows me knows that I'm not a quitter, but I was so upset having lived 30 years in the Dodger organization to see a trade made without the approval, without it being made by the general manager. I thought it was outrageous. I thought it was a terrible trade to begin with, but even more than being a terrible trade, you don't trade Mike Piazza. Even more than being a terrible trade, that to the way that it came down when the Fox people who were really in the television business were trying to help get the television rights for the Florida Marlins, and the trade got mixed in with that because the Marlins were concerned about the financial obligation they had to a couple of players that they sent along to the Dodgers. So I knew this was the first glaring example, as glaring as it could be, that the Fox Dodgers are not the O'Malley Dodgers for sure. And but I didn't quit, because when they called me after they called me to tell me about the trade, then they called me and said the trade couldn't be made because Sheffield had a no trade contract. And as you alluded to, Matt, certainly every general manager in the game knew that. I wasn't going to walk away in that big of a mess, because this is a big mess. So if they made the trade and it actually had gone through, the chapter may have been written differently, but I wasn't going to walk out in that type of situation. And so I stayed, and when I worked out the contract, we worked out the contract to sign Sheffield, and the trade went through, and I went to the press. I told them exactly what had happened. And Fox was, to say the least, upset with me, because they had told the major league owners that there would be a wall between the television's deals and baseball. Well, that wall came tumbling down in the early innings of their ownership. And I told Fox that because they basically wanted me to say that I had made the trade. And I said, you got the wrong guy. It's not that I haven't made a bad trade. See Pedro Martinez, and you can check that out. But if you think I'm going to go before the public and the media and lie, that's not going to happen. And so that was ultimately, they were very upset with me. And I'm told by a number of people, in fact, one of the writers came to me and said, Fred, when I told the truth about how the trade took place, he said, Fred, I'm close to Fox. They're going to fire you as soon as they can. And I said, that may be. But I'm going to stay with the principles and the basics that I've tried to use in 30 years of working and serving the Dodgers, and I'm not going to change.
Yeah, and that contact who gave you that information was onto something. Skip ahead a little bit to Father's Day, June 21st, 1998. Your daughter's birthday, the day your predecessor Al Campanis passed away, and that night you returned from a road trip and were fired in Peter O'Malley's old office. So a lot going on there, and I'm just wondering if we can pause for a moment and have you elaborate on the significance of that fateful day, June 21st, 1998, how that resonates in your mind.
Well, it resonates strongly. First of all, from a personal standpoint, my daughter Jennifer's birthday, which is a very important day for me, for all of us in the family, and the passing of Al Campanis, which was a very sad day. So it was uh, certainly memorable in its own way, uh, because now it was the end of my career with the Dodgers. And my reaction, basically, I called Cheryl. Uh, uh, a driver had picked me or dropped me off at Dodger Stadium after our game in Colorado, and Cheryl had gone home. And I called Cheryl to say, uh, pick me up. I've just been let go by the Dodgers, and we knew that our lives had changed. But as I think back, and I think even at the time, I knew one thing. I'd had to release a number of players, so it wasn't as if woe's me. This is part of business. I understand that. But I think the most important part in that is that I had no regrets. because I knew that I had given the very best that I had to give. And every day I was with the Dodgers. I knew that in my mind and my heart and my soul. And so I I was ready to put that chapter to rest, hoping that maybe there might be another position in baseball. Um, but knowing there are only 30 of these jobs, and to move on to other things, uh, which I did, including teaching where we met at USC, and to have a wonderful opportunities at USC, Long Beach State, ultimately Caltech, to being involved in working for Major League Baseball um, as a columnist, actually doing a few um, games for ESPN Radio. So it was you can't you can't hold on. You cannot hold on to things that no longer belong to you. And some of those
Mhm.
things are out of your control, and you have to let go. Don't try to hold on. Let go. And that's what I did.
Wow. Yeah, I think there's a lot there. And as much as you did move on to other things that, I'm one of many people who has benefited remarkably from what came next in your life. Um, and this isn't necessarily a case of not letting go, but in 2011, you were part of a group bid vying to buy the Dodgers when they were up for sale. Ultimately, lost out to a group led by Magic Johnson. But in Extra Innings, it comes through that there was still a relationship that you rekindled as part of this process. So I'm curious if you could explain a little bit as to what your role was with the group in the ownership bid, and then what you take away from the experience.
Well, the when I heard that Frank McCourt was being going to sell the Dodgers, I got a message on LinkedIn from a name from the past, Ben Wang, who of all things had been the Dodger bat boy, uh, probably the smartest bat boy in the history of the game. There's some smart bat boys, but Ben had gone on to a great education, graduating from John Hopkins with a doctorate in biology, um, working internationally uh, and gaining a lot of experience. And he wanted to put together a group to buy the Dodgers and reached out to me and asked if I would be a part of it. And he said, Fred, everything that has happened to me in my career, I can put back and pin back to my days with you and the Dodgers. So I said, you better come to my office in Pasadena because that's a pretty good come on line. And I'm not sure I believe all that with all the success that you've had. But we formed a great group. I told Ben when he met with me and I could see how capable he was and how sincere he was that we needed to add to our team if he was really serious about making this run. And we added Andy Dolich, tremendous career in sports front offices, and Dick Freeman, former president of the Padres and the Pirates. And we formed a very good team and made a very good run. And Magic and Company um, certainly deserved to win the bid the way they approached it and what they paid. But it was a wonderful experience, a wonderful learning experience.
Yeah, and there's another experience that came about 6 years later. You were welcomed back to Dodger Stadium to throw out the first pitch in June of 2017. And you were really surprised by a video tribute shown on the big screen at the time. And I'm wondering what it was like to be shown that kind of appreciation after all those years, 3 decades with the organization, then a really rough break, and then coming back in that way. What did that mean to you, and what was that moment like?
Well, it really meant the world. As I think I could say otherwise, but I think a picture taken that day, as I looked at the board and they gave this tribute, um, would, um, would speak for itself. Um, it meant a lot because my wife Cheryl was there. My daughters Jennifer and Kimberly were there. My granddaughter Tyler was there. So many friends were there. So it was very nice to have that night, um, and I appreciated the Dodgers reaching out. It's kind of interesting because the Dodgers responded to a column that Bill Platsky of the LA Times wrote. I think the heading was something along the lines of "almost forgotten." It struck me as strange because I thought, oh, my guys, I have so many friendships and so many wonderful relationships. I never considered myself almost forgotten. I was known by the people that meant the most to me, and I didn't need a bigger audience than that. Uh, but it was a nice tribute, and I'm glad that I feel very blessed, and I know how meaningful those things can be.
Yeah, and maybe one of the biggest moments of that evening was a reconciliation with Tommy Lasorda. I understand that the exit from the organization in '98 added some friction to that relationship, but to reconnect with him at that time, what was that moment like?
It was wonderful. It was the highlight. The highlight really was that moment with no one looking other than my two daughters. What had happened was that we got to the stadium, uh, had a box there for us, and I knew I would probably see Tommy, and we had certainly drifted apart uh, in recent years, and I didn't like that feeling at all. And so um, Jennifer and Kim and I went down to the switchboard to pick up tickets to get us on the field. We're walking back on the club level, and here comes Tommy in a kind of a little motorized chair because he had been in the hospital, and his wonderful attendant Felipe was with him. And sometimes I think about these things, and I think this just didn't happen by chance. I don't know how it happens, but you can't script some of the things that happen in our lives. And so here comes Tommy. He'd been in the hospital. I had undergone surgery for cancer, uh, and initially not a very good forecast. And so we came up to Tommy, and he was in this kind of wheelchair, motorized part where he was kind of moving around as they'd stopped there. And I leaned over and put my arm around him and said, Tommy, I love you. And he said, Fred, I love you. So this was a relationship that began more than 50 years ago. And the relationship was so strong. Um, and then it shows that every close relationship like that, family or otherwise, it's never too late to reconnect. It's never too late to tell somebody that you care for them or you love them, no matter whether there might have been a division, because it's never been more true. If we don't do those things and the opportunity presents itself, we may never have the opportunity to do those things. So Tommy and I, from that time, have had the best of times. Uh, I call him. We talk. He's been hospitalized recently, but his spirit is good, and I think the world of him. Uh, and At our last celebrity golf tournament, Tommy was there, and I wanted him there because I wanted to present to him the Celebration of Life Award. Because if there's a life that is deserving of being celebrated, it's Tommy. He has done so much for so many, and so we have we are back to where we started in the spring of 1969 when we developed a friendship that led to me playing for a Spokane team and replacing Bobby Valentine at shortstop in one game. So that's a long journey from me playing shortstop for Tommy's Spokane team to two rather old guys meeting on the club level and giving a little hug. That's a long journey.
Yeah, and I have to dig into something for a moment. What led to you playing shortstop and replacing Bobby Valentine? There's got to be something good there.
Oh, I don't know where they had time for that one, Matt. Maybe later. It was a bit of a challenge where Tommy and I became very close friends in the spring of '69. I was with the Long Beach paper. And I told him, and probably painted a brighter brush of my career as a JV player at Torrance High School. And so Tommy challenged me to play in the game for Spokane, and he challenged the wrong guy because I got into uniform and replaced Bobby Valentine at shortstop in a practice game against Bakersfield at Dodgertown.
Wow, what a moment and what a way to bookend a relationship over the course of so many years. That's awesome. And I did want to touch briefly on your current relationship with the team as well. For more than 3 decades, you held the title of the GM of the last Dodgers team to win a World Series. A couple months ago, they ended the drought, and I know a lot of LA, had at least a brief moment of celebration in 2020 on the heels of the Lakers title. It was a big bright spot for sports fans in the LA area this year. How did you react to the moment, and how would you describe your current relationship with the team?
I would say it's my relationship with the team is very good. My relationship with Dave Roberts is extremely good. I have great respect for Dave because he's one that I'm in more contact with than the front office itself. But I was happy and pleased to be able to congratulate both Dave and Andrew Freeman and his team. Uh, so at the end of the 2019 season, I texted Dave and I said, Dave, it had been a tough season for the Dodgers. And I said, as I recall, that Dave, your team, I think, set a record for wins. Uh, you reached postseason play again, and he was taking all sorts of flack in the press. I said, with all your success, I have never once heard you take credit. I have always heard you take responsibility. I said, one of the happiest days of my life will be when you, Dave Roberts, are holding a World Series championship trophy on behalf of the Dodgers. That was 2019. 1 year later, my hopes came true.
Wow. Yeah, that's a big moment. And I know there were a lot of big moments over, again, the course of decades working for the organization. A lot that's transpired since then. So you overcame a lot of demands throughout your lifetime with the Dodgers organization. But moving on to a far greater challenge than anything with the Dodgers, um, defeating cancer. I would love to have you walk us through the process from a biopsy in January 2015 to a squamous cell carcinoma diagnosis a year and a half later at age 80, everything from radiation to chemotherapy to a life-saving new treatment, immunotherapy. I'm sure there's more beyond that you can elaborate on. It's it's hard to believe the journey. If it wasn't chronicled in Extra Innings, I don't know how many people would be able to believe it. So how has this all been for you?
Well, it's been a remarkable journey. I have been so blessed with my health. I've always tried to take great care of myself, and but in and having spent a lot of time in the sun, being fair skinned, 2015, I had a little spot on my lip, and my dermatologist informed me that after she took a biopsy, was a little concerned. It was hardly noticeable, barely noticeable, that this would have to be addressed by a Mohs procedure. Sent me to a doctor who did the Mohs procedure, a very well known man, very well known doctor. And it seemed to be no problems, clear. Even the doctor said this is extremely minor. And 2016, I started to develop great pain in my face. And as it turned out, they hadn't captured the cancer. It had moved from my lip up my jawbone. And so 2016, it was diagnosed as a cancer, squamous cell carcinoma, in my jawbone. And it was serious, extremely serious, and had to be acted on immediately. And so they said to me that one way to approach this would be to take the fibula bone from my left leg and replace my jawbone, a major operation. And I said, strange things we say in life at different stages. I said, I'm 80 years old. I've been blessed with great health. I'm really more interested in quality of life than length of life. Who says that? I mean, I never even thought about it. I never even had to face anything like this. But I just knew how blessed I had been. And so they did an operation where they cut my throat, took the cancer out of my jawbone, and 2016, and made in the fall of 2016, things looked like they were going well. And then in the beginning of 2017, the cancer came back in my neck. Now they couldn't operate again. I had undergone the operation, 33 radiations to my face, 7 chemos. Now the cancer comes back and they can't operate again. And now I'm kind of thinking I probably should have had that major operation because it's right back in my neck. And the only chance that I had was to be placed on a clinical trial uh, with immunotherapy. And immunotherapy really has saved my life. And then as the journey continued, and as fate would have it, when we got to just a year ago or so, July of 2019, my jawbone was destroyed by all of the radiation and all of the treatment. And so now I had no choice. Now 3 doctors, City Hope, wonderful people, were going to perform an operation to take the fibula bone from my left leg and put it in my jawbone. And so that's what took place. And I've been very fortunate in my recovery with the great help of City of Hope to be here today and be active on a number of fronts, trying to do all that I can do to help City of Hope, doing all that I can do to help young people that I stay in touch with, and being part, of a podcast, Life in the Front Office, that helps young people with an interest in careers in sports. It's been, and the result of that was, well, 2 parts of all of that were that I wanted to raise money for City of Hope. We had 2 golf tournaments, celebrity golf tournaments with great support, where we raised $500,000. And just last July, a book came out with all funds to City of Hope, all net proceeds, titled Fred Clare's Journey to City of Hope and Finding a World Championship Team. And so I've been very pleased Uh, one can see the reviews on Amazon, and the most important part of the reviews, Matt, are these. If you read the reviews, it shows we accomplished what we wanted to accomplish in this. They talk about what a great place City Hope must be, and what a great caregiver my wife, Cheryl, must be. So every patient needs a great hospital, and every patient, if they're very, very fortunate, is blessed by a great caregiver. So I just feel very fortunate. The connection with City Hope uh, has been the most meaningful connection of my life because I have made so many wonderful friendships, contacts, and to be able to help others, hopefully, um, by telling the story of the City of Hope.
Yeah, there's so much in there, and I'm gonna try to balance being respectful of your time and also doing the story the justice, that it deserves. Um, so before we circle back on a couple things, I can't help but think that so many moments along the way force you to confront fear and anxiety. In Extra Innings, they detail that going into one surgery, you were told you might never be able to feel your tongue again afterward. Obviously, the fibula into the jawbone is a major operation. How did you approach those really tough moments, not just physically challenging, but very mentally demanding as well?
I I approached them with the thought that, wow, I've got a great team here. These guys are good. These guys are really good. I've seen them. I know what they're all about. I know how they approach patients. I know what they've done. I've got a huge confidence in my new team here. And I approached the rest of it, I guess, in retrospect, much as I approached my challenges with the Dodgers. I knew that I would do uh, what I could in terms of the recovery. And I knew that no matter what came, um, I would deal with it, whatever it was, to the best of my ability. So I didn't have any fear. Uh, I don't think fear is helpful. Evaluation is helpful. Fear, I don't think, is a good thing. So I followed, with the help of my wife, Cheryl, everything that the City of Hope told me that I should do in recovery. Um, and if they, after the surgery, it told me to walk around the loop once, I went around the loop 3 or 5 or 10 times. So I wasn't going to cheat myself out of out of the best recovery possible. But all that being said, it has more to do uh, with the expertise of the City of Hope than it has to do with my own desire to continue the journey.
Yeah, and there were so many false starts along the way when it comes to continuing this journey. There are several examples, you touched on them earlier, about overcoming some obstacles, getting to a point where everything seems to finally be in the clear, only to have another bomb dropped on you. I think about Sisyphus rolling that rock, only for it to come back down every time. How did you and your wife Cheryl handle all the twists and turns that came your way during this journey?
I think that there is certainly a part of faith, whatever our individual faith and belief might be. Um, there are uh, many things in life that we deal with that are certainly clearly out of our hands. uh, and, um, and I don't really see my own journey as something that's extreme, if you will. It's been chronicled in a book, but I know firsthand the battle of others. I know firsthand the battles that of individuals who fought as gallantly as you can, who didn't survive. My friend Kevin Towers is an example of that. I wish Kevin was here to tell his story, but he isn't here. So I think it's a matter of doing everything that one can in a recovery, fighting as hard as you possibly can, never giving up, but ultimately uh, accepting your fate. Uh, it's strange. The other day I came across something that I've never been a close follower of the great coach Jimmy Valvano, but for some reason, I was thinking of something, and I looked back on his life and his career, and the speech he gave at the, I guess it was the ESPY or the
Hmm.
ESPN Awards, and he said that no matter what happens, and he was facing uh, certain death. It was very powerful. Uh, he said, they can't take my heart and they can't take my mind and they can't take my soul. So here I am able to tell a story at the age of 85. Uh, the great coach, I believe, died at 47. So I think that those are those people. How do you get by? Uh, what helps me is the inspiration I gain from others. So if I, in some very small way, literally, and I mean that, can serve as a inspiration to someone else, where so many, uh, like the coach, like my friend Kevin, have served as inspirations for me, I feel a sense of I feel a sense of being in good company, and I feel a sense of obligation.
Yeah, and you've mentioned one of the obligations trying to bring as much awareness to City of Hope as possible. That's City of Hope National Medical Center in the LA suburb of Duarte. They were a true lifeline for you, not just providing healthcare, but genuine care in every sense of the word. And I'm curious as to how you found them. There are many more famous hospitals and medical centers, but how did you find them, and what role have they played in getting you from where you were 5 years ago to where things are today?
Well, they have been the guiding light, the guiding hand. Uh, the My only involvement with City of Hope is when my dear secretary Rosie Gutierrez was hit by cancer. Cheryl and I visited
Hmm.
City of Hope to see Rosie, and that was the only time I was ever there. So I knew nothing other than this was where Rosie had been, and hearing about City of Hope, but nothing in any depth. But when this I was struck by this cancer, then the doctor who had performed the Mohs procedure uh, made the recommendation that it should be that my uh, best place would be City of Hope. So that's how I discovered City of Hope, and going there for the first time in 2016, and meeting the doctors and so many visits through all that we've been through. It's uh, it's like uh, really almost like a second home for a period of time. And when I walk in there now, I was there earlier this week for occupational therapy on my neck, and to see the challenges of the patients during the time of COVID. When I was at, see, you have to recognize where you're fortunate. Okay, I undergo cancer treatment. I didn't do it during a COVID pandemic. My wife could be there. My kids could be there. Friends could be there. I had support. I walk in City Hope now. You talk about a challenging situation. It is a huge challenge. So I don't feel sorry in any way for myself. All that I want to do is to say, how can I help? Because I can see it, I can feel it, and I know it. And I want to do what I can to help other people.
Yeah, and I think the new book Extra Innings is doing a lot of that. And if you're a sports fan or a fan of seeing the best in humanity in general, it's a must either way. For sports fans, there's a who's who of luminaries featured in this book, including a lot of great Dodgers: Vin Scully, Tommy Lasorda, Peter O'Malley, 2020 World Series winning manager Dave Roberts, players Kirk Gibson, Steve Garvey, Oral Hershiser, Mike Scioscia, even some non-Dodgers: Bob Costas, Pete Rose. It's crazy. And beyond sports, I think there's a lot of hope for cancer patients everywhere to be gleaned from this book. Something that stuck with me right off the bat was the foreword written by LA Times columnist Bill Plaschke. You referenced him earlier. And he described a heated argument you had with Kirk Gibson. And one of the points he made was not to mistake Fred Claire's kindness for weakness. He won't be intimidated. And I think just the way you communicated the last point you were making about City of Hope and the challenges people are facing right now and how you're trying to help. I think it gets at that. A lot of fighting spirit, still trying to be a very kind person. How do you approach those two? They seem to be almost opposing characteristics, but clearly you've got them in spades. And I'm wondering how you reconcile kindness and the fighting spirit at the same time.
I don't try to. I just I respond. Bill Platsky was very kind in his introduction. Um, I think that kindness should never be interpreted as lack of competitiveness. Uh, I think that kindness um, may be one of the great traits that any of us could have. It's not for us to judge whether we have it or whether we don't have it. It's usually on display to be judged by others. But I think of great competitors, great people that I have known, and they exemplify, the great people I've known exemplify kindness and spirit and competitiveness. And no one uh, did that more, has done that more than the ultimate competitor and the greatest Dodger of them all, Jackie Robinson. And the quote that's in the book and that lives with me uh, because it was Jackie's life's work is a life is not important except on the impact it has on other lives. And Jackie lived that life in caring for others. That's kindness. When you care for others, when you care, in fact, more for others uh, than you do for yourself, that's not me. That's Jackie. That's the life he lived, And it was my great honor to be with him in his last public appearance in 1972 when he threw out the first pitch at the World Series in Cincinnati and was to sadly pass away 9 days later. So you talk about a competitive spirit. No one had it more than Jackie. No one. But you talk about kindness and caring for others. Uh, that was Jackie. So I just, again, I try to look to those where I've been so blessed to people I've been so blessed to know and to realize and be so appreciative of how those examples uh, have been set for me and for all of us.
Yeah, well, you took one of my questions. We'll get shortly to just a quick rapid fire to close things out. I was going to ask you greatest Dodger of all time in your book, but we now know that answer, and I think it's a tough one to argue with. Before we get to a few rapid fire questions, one more thing to touch on related to extra innings, juxtaposing the City of Hope alongside the Dodgers as a championship caliber team, if you will. And I'd like to throw out one more nomination for a championship caliber team, knowing what I do now, and that would be Fred and Cheryl Clare. Your wife, Cheryl, seems like such a hero in so many regards. And I know just trying to juggle my day job and this podcast feels daunting, and I can't fathom trying to do that with my wife's thoughtfulness and support. So, I mean, Cheryl stepped up in such a major way, so many major ways. I was wondering if you could describe Cheryl, your relationship, and her role in who you are, and maybe her role behind the scenes in so many wonderful things that you've accomplished.
Well, Cheryl has been and has meant everything in her support. Uh, there was never a time that I walked in the City of Hope without Cheryl by my side. And I think it's so important to pay tribute to the caregivers uh, for all that they do and all that they go through. So Cheryl is the rock, um, and has always been there. And there aren't really words to describe it. Um, I don't share as often, but when I um, inscribed a book on my Dodger career, my 30 years in Dodger Blue, to Cheryl, it says it better than anything that I can say or think of. You are the wind beneath my wings.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Um, I think this is a good point to move on to a couple quick questions just to let the listeners get to know you a little bit better. You've clearly accomplished so much, overcome so much, and still have so much to offer people out there. So to get to know Fred Clare a little bit better, beyond the Dodgers and everything chronicled in Extra Innings, I guess kind of tying in with Extra Innings as a theme, what would you say is your favorite book?
Um, Good to Great. Jim Collins, Good to Great. Everyone should read it. Uh, it really, the only sports person mentioned, and I've mentioned him before, the only sports person isn't there is Coach Wooden. But if you want to know how to run a business, read Jim Collins, Good to Great.
Got it. All right, adding that to my list as we speak. And then if you could have dinner with one person, dead or alive, who would that be?
Um, it would be Jackie. It would be Jackie.
Yeah, I think you've touched on so many reasons why. That's a very strong answer. And then one last rapid fire question for you. If you had one piece of advice to leave for future generations, I know you do so much to help young people find their way in life. There's a lot that you've done for me. What would that advice be looking forward beyond 2020?
Well, I'm referencing people I've referenced, but they're very much on my mind. My advice to any young person would be in the words, again, of Coach Wooden. Make each day your masterpiece. You don't have days to waste. Make each day your masterpiece.
Yeah. All right. Well said. And I love that note because a big part of the inspiration behind Props and Hops is the relationship I was fortunate to build with David Malinsky, famous in betting and other circles in life. Um, and he, again, tragically passed away too soon in 2018. I end each episode with a quote that either comes from him or inspires his legacy and keeping it alive. I think very few people can match his wisdom, his strength, and his character. It's just about unparalleled. And Fred, I want to thank you because you're in that pantheon.
Thank you very much.
And I can vividly remember sitting across from you at a table at Pie and Burger in Pasadena about 11 years ago. And one of the pieces of advice that you left for me that has really stuck with me over time was to embrace discomfort. So those are some words that we can use as the quote to tie a bow around this episode, because certainly you've overcome so much discomfort. And in my own little world at the time, there was a lot of discomfort trying to find my footing in my career coming out of the Great Recession. And there's been a lot of discomfort throughout 2020 on so many levels in a pandemic and turbulent year in general. I often reflect on your advice. It's been so liberating and so empowering. So Fred, I just want to acknowledge your honesty, your kindness, your strength in every sense of the word. And that Jackie Robinson quote, a life is not important except in the impact it has on other lives. You've had a profound impact on my life, the lives of others in my family, and then so many others in Southern California and beyond. And that speaks volumes to the importance of your life. So thank you so much for all that you do and continue to do.
Thank you very much, Matt. It's been great to be with you. Take good care, and we will stay in touch.
All right, that sounds like a plan.
Okay.
Thanks, Fred.